Welcome to the Abundance Hack Show, Season 4, where we are focusing on mastery. The last 3 seasons, I gave you the information. Now, we're focusing on integrating it into our lives and embodying it. If you are ready to master your thoughts, emotions, and patterns to feel whole, fulfilled, and really grounded in who you are without dimming your shine so you can live the abundant life that you truly desire, then you are in the right place. Hey M&Ms, thank you for tuning in to the Abundance Hack Show. What are you manifesting in your life today? If you're joining me for the first time, although M&Ms are really yummy candies, it actually stands for magical manifestors. And today we're going to talk about entrepreneurs and their mental and emotional health. But before we dive in, today's guest is Shulamit, and I'm really excited to chat with her because she is a therapist for entrepreneurs. So we're going to talk about mental health risk for entrepreneurs. And I think that this is a topic that's really, really important. So I'm excited to chat. So Shulamit, my first question for you is, what does abundance mean to you?
Oh, I didn't have hang on a second. I'm checking with myself. So abundance has a feel to me of warmth and satisfaction. So I know that I'm experiencing abundance when I have those feelings. Also like joy, fun, play, like all the kind of like, for me, open feelings, open and happy feelings. And the abundance comes to me as the opposite of fear. Yeah. Or one of the opposites of fear. Thank you for asking.
I love that answer. And I ask this question to every guest, and I don't think that anyone has ever said the feeling of satisfaction. So it's not a thing. It's whatever you feel satisfied with. I love that.
Well, I think abundance can show up in so many ways,
Mm-hmm.
right? And in fact, while I'm a very critical thinker about the law of attraction, one of the things I like very much about it that a friend taught is that when you have these feelings of abundance, when you're in that feeling of like, oh, this is what I want, this is it, I'm living it now, that then you say, this is what I want more of. This universe, this divine, like a higher power, this world, this friends and beings, all those who are listening to me, this is what I want more of. And so I'm used to attuning to that feeling and then inviting more, you know?
I love it. So good. So tell us about you. I want to learn about your journey to becoming a therapist for entrepreneurs.
Sure. So the Reader's Digest condensed version. When I first started school, when I went to university when I was 19, I started in social work. But I ended up getting involved in the community radio there and took a detour into radio and TV and then PR and communications and then translation, which is all under the communication umbrella. But I got injured when I was a translator, which is some people might not know. And I have a cat on my lap and her hair just went like this. Interpretation is the out loud stuff and translation is actually documents. So I was typing all the time and I got an injury and I had to do my own occupational rehab. And it made sense because I had always had what we call side hustle of supporting people in their personal growth, as a yoga teacher, as a trainer in nonviolent communication, as a certified guide in focusing. So I was always a little bit entrepreneurial on the side, even though my main gigs were salaried, well, contracts, but still salaried. So it made sense to go back to my roots of my social work degree and this personal growth side hustle that I had been doing, to go back to school and get a master's degree in counseling and spirituality, and then open a private practice as a therapist and a registered social worker. So you probably know, as a person who supports entrepreneurs, that most small businesses fail within the first 1 to 5 years, especially the first year. Most of them don't make it there. And people in the helping professions are notorious for being bad with money. And that was not going to be my story. So the minute I left, because I wanted to finish before I was 50, my master's, and I did, but this is like my retirement plan. This has to last me for the rest of my life. So there was no way my business could fail. And there was no way that I could just putz around and like this be a side hustle. It had to support me. So right out of school, I went into entrepreneurship training, into business coaching and business classes. And I started hanging out with entrepreneurs at the chamber and other women in business networking groups. So I right away became immersed as the only therapist in the world of entrepreneurship and business, or the only therapist I knew and that I ran into. And in my own entrepreneurship journey, learning to run my business and hanging out with entrepreneurs, I really saw the intersection of mental health and entrepreneurship, and what a rough ride it can be emotionally and for your mental health to run a business, even though it's super fulfilling and like the best thing ever. I'm unemployable. I would never go back to work, to salaried work, but still it's hard. And so I had a holistic group practice that I closed about a year and a half ago now. And I went back to solo practice, and I had to decide, what am I going to do with my solo practice? And it just made sense to orient my solo practice to supporting entrepreneurs, and especially women identifying entrepreneurs, because of my, my area of expertise in gender and stuff like that from my academic work. It just made sense because there's nobody supporting entrepreneurs with their mental health. Mm-hmm. So that's how I got here.
Yeah. So what would you say is like the biggest thing that you saw as a reoccurring theme of things that entrepreneurs struggled with?
The main thing, like I've identified 6 plus a secret 7th factor.
Okay, let's dive right in, because you have 6. So instead of just focusing on the main one.
Let's start with the main one, because I think it really is of this. I wanted to mention that there are 6 plus 1, but of these, the main one that I hear from people over and over and over again is isolation. And we know from the academic research that isolation is a social determinant of health. It's a factor to a certain degree outside your control that has an impact on your physical health. So we know isolation is related to many, when we talk about health prevention and public health, isolation, and we've experienced that in the past 18 to 20 months too, with the forced isolation that we've experienced, entrepreneurs or not, and the impact of that on our mental health. And that is no less true for a person who is surrounded by people, but has no one who gets what they're going through. And that's the case with entrepreneurs. But also, not only do we not have people who get, or we don't have access to people who get what we're going through, there are simply a limited number of leaders, even more limited number of female leaders, limited number of entrepreneurs, even more limited number of women entrepreneurs. Plus, if you're running a business, you're also busy. So it's hard to get out of the running the business to take time to socialize. And then if you do socialize, who do you socialize with? So isolation is such a complex, it's a topic with many interconnecting factors that have such a significant impact on entrepreneurs. And over and over and over again, when I name this, when I talk about this in my blogs or my social media or with clients or in classes, like isolation, everybody's like, yeah.
I feel like it's something that you don't hear entrepreneurs talk about a lot, and maybe they need to like hear it named, and then it clicks like, yeah. I do struggle with that, but I don't think that we even notice that we struggle with it, because there's so much programming that goes into it where society. So I know growing up, I used to hear the term, it's lonely at the top. So I think that we're programmed to think that when you're doing something like starting a business, it is going to be lonely. And then there's a lot of programming that says like, keep your head down and hustle, or like, just like focus on what you're doing. So we're almost programmed to isolate ourselves when we're building our empire, so to speak.
Well, there are 2 other factors that you've kind of alluded to that I'm going to pull out and name. One is this thing of, the belief that if you need help, you're weak. Right. And I, like all the women I work with, are super strong, competent, capable women. And the image I like to use is of a dam. When you have a big dam that's very strong and powerful, but it has a little bitty hole in it. And if we leave that little bitty hole, what happens?
The water leaks out.
Right. And when water, we all know what does water do over time? It erodes.
Mm.
A little trickle just erodes and erodes and erodes and erodes until that little pinhole becomes a hole so big that the whole dam collapses. Right? The dam is inherently strong, but that little bitty thing, if we provide that with support, that makes the dam stronger. Mm. And it's the same case with human beings, and especially women entrepreneurs, that we are strong women and we are stronger with support. But the belief that it's weak to ask for help prevents us from getting the support we need. And that's a factor of isolation as well. Another factor of isolation is this lonely at the top thing. At the top of what? We're at the top of an empire full of people. We're surrounded by clients, employees, contractors. However, our role in that group is of holding space for all of them. So even though there are people everywhere, we are still alone/lonely. Right? So sometimes we think of, if there's people, how can I be lonely? But the truth is, how we are, the quality of our relationships with the people with whom we work, they might support us. Like for our contractors, they might support, like my VA is essential to my well-being. And she provides me with a great deal of support. And she's not a person in whom I'm necessarily going to confide on an emotional level. And that's outside all the people around me. So that's another factor of isolation, because you have this feeling of aloneness in front of all these people, right? It's a very complex, you can see like all the layers, right? And these are two things that came to me from what you just said that I wanted to pull out because I think they're important.
Yeah, they're super duper important. Okay, so let's dive into the 6 factors of mental health risk, because I'm sure that those things will be intertwined into those 6 factors, and then I'll take notes of things that I want to dive a little deeper.
All right.
Dive deeper into.
Sure. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the acronym VUCA, VUCA. It stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So that's one of the VUCA, which is actually 4 things, but it's easier to just reduce it to the acronym VUCA. Like, we face as entrepreneurs these things on a daily basis. Right? And especially in the past year and a half, I'm sure many people can see how they've experienced volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, right? We mentioned isolation. There's also, and you alluded to this, hustle. Like, even if we're philosophically as an individual opposed to the concept of hustle, still running a business, we have to work hard. And there's a toll. And often we don't structure our lives or our businesses in such a way that it gives us an opportunity to recover from the stress of running a business. So that's why I include hustle as a factor, or as a term that points us to this phenomenon of the drain on us of running a business, emotional and physical. We mentioned isolation. There are barriers to receiving support. And so those barriers are also a factor that come to play on our mental health as entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurial poverty is a reality. Like, we can gross all kinds of money, but if we have an empire, small or large, if we have contractors, if we have software we have to pay for, what we net and what we gross are not necessarily proportionate, right? And so then when our cash flow is tough, finding the money to access support of all sorts, a therapist, a coach, and those kinds of professional supports, it's difficult. There are barriers. Plus, people qualified to support us, people qualified to provide mental health support for entrepreneurs is, and even like just therapists, especially now, right? Everybody's got a waiting list. So there are a number of barriers to access to support for entrepreneurs. We also tend to link our self-worth to our business success. And this is not untrue for people who have meaningful careers, who are really tied to their careers. And it's more intense for entrepreneurs. And in combination with the rest of these factors, right? it takes on a greater weight, because it also, not only our self-worth is linked to our success, but ultimately it's our survival. Because if we can't make money in our business, then we can't pay our bills, which means we don't have a roof over our head, which means we don't have food on the table, right? So it's more even than self-worth. And just as I'm talking to you about this, I think I'm going to rename that that the S from self-worth to survival, because it is a survival. It brings up that, and you and I were in the training, the Do No Harm training with Nicole, about how Nicole Lewis-Keeber, about how trauma shows up in business. She and I run the business therapy center together. And, she talks about how trauma shows up in your business. Well, if you have been in your life in fear for survival, or are currently in fear for survival because of your business is not going to succeed, like connecting so closely those two things, that's really hard on your mental health. And then finally, the sixth factor is that the folks who are entrepreneurial come from a pool of people in the general population who happen to be predisposed to mental health challenges. So a psychiatrist and psychologist in the US, this one guy who's both a psychiatrist and a psychologist, did research on this topic, and he identified that people who are energetic, motivated, and creative are also entrepreneurial and also experience strong emotional states. Also, the National Institute of Mental Health has said that 49% of entrepreneurs experience mental health challenges, as opposed to 32% of the general population. So we have this predisposition that comes with us when we come into and then face these other 5 factors. And then finally, the secret 7th is that all 6 of these interact with and potentiate one another. So like, if we're struggling with our mental health as entrepreneurs, no wonder, right?
Oh my goodness, there's so much to dive into. The things that stood out a lot to me, just knowing the clients that I work with in sound healing and my own personal journey, is uncertainty, hustle, support, self-worth, and survival. So I'd love for you to talk about uncertainty, because I know I talk about the whole hustle grind society that we have now a lot, but uncertainty, how do you feel that plays into our mental health? And I'm sure like uncertainty and survival are very linked as well. So
100%. Yeah. Well, uncertainty, like speaking from the point of view of the nervous system and mental health, right? When you don't know what's happening, you are on alert, right? So you're like, for listeners, my hands are thrown up, palms forward, I'm making my eyes big, and I'm like looking around with a kind of alarmed expression on my face. My upper body is kind of back a little bit, like, because you're like, not sure, right? And so this alarm state, this is in business, we are never sure of anything really, because there are no direct, even if we were selling goods, our ability to influence our sales is ambiguous at best. We don't know, we can't predict with 100% accuracy what's going to bring in more clients or what's going to sell more units, right? We have that uncertainty. We can project, we can make our plans and implement our tactics, but we never actually know what the result is going to be. So there's that uncertainty of like, ooh, how's this going to turn out? Ooh, am I going to be okay? Ooh, is this going to bring the money I need? Ooh, am I going to be able to pay my bills? But there's also the uncertainty around, complexity is part of the complexity of data that comes in that we have to handle, that when we say, okay, well, given this complex data that's ambiguous, it's unclear 100%, it's not like black and white, right? And we take this information, we do our best, but we're just never sure of all the data we're working with either, right? So uncertainty in our businesses can show up in so many ways, and these are just a few of them. I wonder if you have any experience in any information to share about your experience, Niajae, about uncertainty in your business.
Oh, there's tons of uncertainty, and it's interesting why this stood out to me is because I've never named it. I've never named the uncertainty. I think that it's something I have to sit with, and like how, and how uncertainty feels in my body. But I think that it causes us to be in constant survival mode. So I feel
Yes,
like you said, they're all intertwined. So as far as survival goes, how does an entrepreneur get out of that kind of survival and actually feel supported? And I know this is something that Nicole Lewis Keeber talks about often, feeling supported by their business and feeling more like they're thriving and they're not just surviving.
yeah, such a good question. I think part of this has to do with the stage of the business that you're in. I think initially in startup, we are quite rightly in this heightened state of vigilance around all the things. I think when we're starting, you know, you need to be on alert, you need to be aware, you need to pay attention. And this is like the immediacy of a threat. It's the natural survival instinct of our organism that provides us with this powerful tool for survival and coping, right? And initially, when we're in that threat response, well, and when we're encountering this demand on our nervous system, and we mobilize this, well, the challenge response is actually better than the threat response. And I write about this on my blog, in my blogs, and I'll give you the link, you can put in the show notes, about distinguishing between threat is kind of panicky, challenge is like I'm in the zone. So this initial stage of heightened activation in the body and the mind to confront the challenges of starting up is very correct. I think it's what will help us do well. Just like in sports or in creativity, we want to be in the zone. It makes us our best self. But if we stay in that activated state and never get any time to down regulate and rest and digest, we end up really depleted. Like, you can't play a game, a sports, you know, they cycle team members in on and off the court, and they have bye weeks and all that stuff. And it's meant on purpose to empower people to return to the challenge state. So even when we're in startup, we still do need to plan in that down regulation, rest and digest phase so that we can come back and face the challenge fully resourced. However, after a certain period in your business growth where things are more stable, and it's not that we don't have VUCA still, but it's less intense than it was initially, then it's time to start to cultivate this. So the brain has a negativity bias. It's a way of surviving. It pays attention to what's bad, because thinking of from the point of view of the brain is kind of like a bunny, always on the lookout for bears. It has to remember where the bear is, because otherwise the bear will eat it, right? Then it has to remember where the bear is and stay away from the bear. It doesn't need to know where the flowers are, because flowers are not life and death. Who cares? If it finds flowers, big deal. If it doesn't, who cares? Whereas if it encounters the bear, that's a crisis, right? But when we come into the second phase of our business, and when we come into the second phase of mental health, like let's say we've experienced trauma, right? The second part of the second phase of moving out of this hyperactivation is to expand, to include both sides of the picture, not excluding the negative, because it's really important data, but including the positive. And so from a business point of view, that kind of thing, like the weekly, monthly, quarterly, and yearly reviews, where we look back at our wins and what's working, and we specifically take on a practice of noticing and taking that in, then we can train ourselves to remember that I can trust that things have worked out for me in this way. It's not a global, oh, la, 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 things will work out. No, because you have to, in business, always be aware of the risk and mitigate for those risks, right? But also to come from a resource place to remember, oh yeah, but this worked and this worked and this worked. I can trust that X and Y worked out this way for me. And doing that on a regular basis, cultivating that awareness of what did work and trust in the things that worked, is really important, and in a way of moving out of that sole focus on the negative, what we call survival, and into a more holistic and more accurate and empowering, nourishing way of looking at things so that we have the whole picture.
Mm, so powerful. I think that I to kind of simplify what I heard is, well, I turned this into like a journal exercise.
Oh,
So
right on.
like writing down like what are your challenges? What are you fearful of? Because naming it takes away some of that power. And then also writing down, and I wrote down take inventory of what's working. So I like to say take inventory, but journaling what's actually working. And if you commit to journaling every day of like what is working in your business, in your life, and this could go across the board in your
Yeah.
relationships,
Yeah.
then you have this like list of things that you can focus more energy on if you know that this is working. So sometimes it's really those simple, just simplify it in your brain, like we have the answers if we really just check in and pay attention to what's going on.
Yes, I 100% agree. And this is a bit like where attention goes, energy flows kind of thing.
Mhm.
But it's really important to remember that it's like the risk of this kind of thinking is that people expect that it will eradicate the negative. And it's not about that. It's about a balance. We need to see both. The other really important thing that you mentioned that I want to emphasize is the regularity of this practice. That because we're developing new neural pathways in our brain when we're working to overcome the negativity bias and include the whole picture. And so it's something you have to do over and over and over again. If weekly is good enough, but because otherwise the brain's survival default is negative. And it's so important to have a structure and a process by which you take inventory on a regular basis so that that data stays in your body as a new neural pathway that you can rely on the next time the crap hits the fan. And this is part of having a challenge response. If you've done this regular process and you've got all this data and all this trust that you've cultivated for yourself, and then the crap hits the fan and you flip your lid, you freak out emotionally, you go, oh my gosh, it's a disaster. And then you can take a breath or two and you can then say to yourself, but I remember that things have worked out. And this evokes the challenge response. It helps you narrow down your focus and you say, I remember my capacity. I remember that I know how to do things. And you can take a breath and then the emotions come down a little bit. And then you can start to say, what do I need to do right now? And maybe it's call my therapist. Maybe it's call my friend, my biz bestie. Maybe it's call my coach. But at least you can move from this panic state to the challenge response and start figuring out what steps you can take. But it relies on this very regular practice of taking inventory, like you say, of what works.
Yeah. So I wholeheartedly believe in therapy. I think everyone should be in some form of therapy. So a business therapist, what are some indications that someone should seek out a business therapist?
Well, what I've observed with entrepreneurs, well, people in general, this is just a general principle of how the human brain works, but specifically, there's more at stake for an entrepreneur. So, how the human brain works is that when we're freaking out, we can't think straight. So, if you can imagine, I've got my hand in a fist with my thumb tucked in, and my arm leading up to my fist is the spinal column. The base of my fist, where the wrist joins the arm, is the lizard or reptilian brain. Then I flip my hand around and there's the thumb tucked in the middle there. That's the mammalian brain. And then my fingers are curved over the top, and that's the human brain. And so what will happen is the data will come in through the body, and the body reads it as the organism, the nervous system reads it as a threat. The amygdala gets hot, which means, and the amygdala is the emotion center. So we get emotional. And when the amygdala gets hot, we flip our lid. The prefrontal cortex, where all our higher level reasoning, problem solving, creativity, all this stuff, it's literally our CEO self. Whether you run a business or not, your CEO self goes offline when your emotions are high. So I'm sure you can see as I describe this, how if you're an entrepreneur running a business and you no longer have access to the very functions of your brain that you need to run your business, you're going to be in trouble, right? So if you find yourself flipping your lid and struggling to calm your emotions and to make good decisions in your business, this is one of the indicators that it could be helpful to have a therapist to support you in regulating your emotions and learning how to do that. But also, so there's two aspects. One is you need a good place to share where nobody's going to judge or shame or blame, and nobody has any stake. There's not going to be any you can talk shit about whatever you want to your therapist, because your therapist is bound by ethics and law not to share with anyone. Whereas if you were to talk to your friend from the networking group and talk shit about something that was, who knows where that might go for you, right? So letting it out with somebody safe is the first aspect. And then the second aspect is learning skills that can help you regulate your emotions on the fly, so that then you can get your lid back on your CEO self, and that can support you. So if you want, if you find yourself the emotional side of things, and with all this stress, right, all the factors that I mentioned, this is often going to make you flip your lid. So if you're struggling with any of these 6 factors also, and you find that they're dysregulating you, that they're making you emotional, and that's impairing your ability to make the decisions you want to make and be the CEO you want to be, that's the time to get support from a therapist. That's one of the signals that you might want to get support from a therapist who understands entrepreneurship.
And then what about isolation? What are some like key indications that someone is struggling with isolation, even if they don't have the awareness around it to name it?
Well, as you mentioned, that sense of loneliness. You can have a sense of not belonging, right? Like at the networking group, where if you're going through stuff and you're feeling emotional and you're in a group where everybody's happy, but you're like, there's nothing wrong with the group of the people, but I just feel like I can't be my whole self here. And it's true, like boundaries are really important for everybody, for mental health, and especially for entrepreneurs, where you want to be judicious about with whom you share. So it is true that you don't want to go like emotionally bleeding all over the person next to you at the chamber breakfast. But at the same time, if you're there and you're noticing this sense of like, ooh, I've got stuff going on that I can't talk to people about here, that lets you know that's kind of an indicator of isolation. This sense of like, I have nobody to talk to, nobody gets me. But even at a deeper level, what will happen is they feel off and they don't know what's wrong with them. And then they get really upset about what's wrong with them. They think, ooh, I'm broken. Ooh, something's the matter. Ooh, this is a problem. Like they start kind of shaming and blaming themselves and thinking something's wrong with me. Like at a fundamental level, I'm a broken human being on some level. Those kinds of feelings are the result of isolation as well. And it's funny, I will say, all the stuff we've talked about aside, on an informal level, kind of my number one job is to let people know there's nothing wrong with them. So for example, when I lay out these 6 factors to somebody and I say, no wonder you're crying at the drop of a hat and you can't sleep. Look at what you're going through. And they go, oh. And then they say, oh, you mean I'm not crazy? And I'm like, no, you're totally not crazy. And they're like, nothing's the matter with me. And I'm like, no, look, what you've been through, it makes sense that you're feeling the way you're feeling. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean you're not feeling crappy. For sure, you're still feeling crappy, but there's really nothing wrong with feeling crappy because look, right? Mm-hmm. My informal job is to basically tell people there's nothing wrong with them. And that alleviates already 50% of most people's distress.
Yeah. And you mentioned shame. So I think that shame is huge, 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 huge. We have so much shame and we store it in our body. Like, me doing sound therapy, there's so much shame stored in our body. And I think that it's directly correlated with the self-worth. And I think that in a time of social media where we're looking at other people's businesses and lifestyles and success and everything, and we don't feel like they're going through the same problems that we are, even though they probably are.
Oh, for sure.
It causes us to have shame because we've attached our self-worth to our success. So can you speak to that a little bit, the self-worth piece?
Oh, yeah. Well, we tell ourselves all kinds of stories about what we see, right? We tell our, and what often happens is we're comparing our beginning to somebody else's end, right? We look at their outcome without being privy to what happened behind the scenes and how they got there. And we think that we're on the same, we tell ourselves, and often a lot of the marketing does kind of, oh, I'm just like you, but look where I am. Well, no, if you're there, you're not just like me, right? So it's important to notice the stories we tell ourselves about these things and what we make that mean. And when I look at someone and I say, that's where they are and I'm here, and I make it mean that there's something wrong with me, that's where we get into the shame. Because shame, the ultimate story of shame is that there's something wrong with me, that I am bad or I am wrong. And that's very, very hard to hear. Like, it's very hard to, so painful. Like, there's just really nothing as painful, I think, as shame, and as debilitating and difficult. And in my mind, in my life, and in my practice, personally and with clients, this a kind of gentle self-kindness around these things shifts that a bit. So when I see somebody and I see where they are and I see that I'm here, and I start to tell myself the story that there's something the matter with me because I should be over there, and I start to feel the pain of that, to say to myself, oh, I noticed that this is painful right now, that I'm having and you can see I'm placing my palm down around my heart space. This is my comforting gesture, but other people have their own. And you can just feel that sense of self-touch and notice, it's hard. Seeing this person is bringing up all kinds of stuff for me, and this is really tough for me. And no wonder it's tough, because I have aspirations and I'm struggling and things are difficult right now. I'm having a hard time. No wonder is a good antidote, of a good first step to caring for the shame. The shame journey is long and complex and difficult, mainly because shame itself is so painful and difficult, but that's a teeny tiny itty bitty little first step that you might like to play with in response to your question.
Yeah. So I saw you said you have a die in the ditch belief. I'd love for you to share that, but I've never actually heard the term die in the ditch. So can you explain that?
Sure. So it's the thing that, like, you stake your flag and you're going to defend it to the death. That this is the thing that, like, come hell or high water, I'm sticking to it. This is the thing that I would die in the ditch for. And I talked about it a little bit at the beginning. We are stronger with support. We are just stronger with support. And I talked about the analogy of the dam, right? And to bring it down to science and brass tacks, and out of the, like, touchy-feely, feel good, like, woo, inspirational talk, which is true, right? We are stronger with support. But when we are encountering difficulty and experiencing stress, that brings up emotions. When emotions come, as I said, we flip our lid. And the main way to regulate emotions is to sit with somebody. And so I'm bringing in so I have my one hand with my fingers up and my other hand coming in a fist. This is a person with their lid on. The fingers are curled down over the emotion center. And I'm freaking out. And when I come in to sit with this other person, or they come to sit with me, and they've got their lid on, that they are calmer than I am in this moment, that helps me calm down. And when I calm down, my lid comes back on again, and I have access to my CEO self. And that's the neuroscience behind we are stronger with support. When there is someone there with us, our body, mind, spirit, a safe somebody, can relax, and we can access our CEO self and do better, make better decisions, keep ourselves safe, make decisions that promote our safety, right? So that's what I mean when I say we are stronger with support.
I love it. Yeah. And I think that it's so hard as an entrepreneur to even allow support, especially if you had a childhood where you didn't have supportive parents,
Yes.
or you had absent parents. We don't even know and I say we because I've had, an absent dad and a single mom that was very busy. And so my needs were not prioritized. And so allowing that support
Yeah.
in is challenging when you don't really know what support looks or feels like.
Yeah, this is a really important point. And I have a similar experience to you, not in the details, but in the absence. Right. And so, and also some of the people who were supposed to be safe for me were not safe. They were harmful and scary to me.
Mhm.
So reaching out for support is not like other people are scary or dangerous or just not there. That was one of the beliefs I had that I had to work on in my recovery was nobody's coming to help me. Even if I asked, nobody would come. Right. So part of our recovery journey is learning who's safe and how to ask for help. Because one of the things that happens to us when we've been in this situation, many people will just, will lie, metaphorically speaking, lie down in the middle of the street bleeding and expect that will be sufficient to get us what we need. And sadly, we live in a world that's just going to exploit vulnerability. That's in the majority, right? So part of asking for help is learning how and learning who, right? And that's where there are many, many supportive resources available online where like therapists and coaches, and I would recommend that if you're working with a coach, that you check that they are trauma informed, that they understand the impact of trauma on the nervous system and how that plays out. Not that they have to treat your trauma, but it does play an important role. Or that you work with a trauma trained therapist like me or Nicole or some of the other folks working because they can help with this fear that you have around what help is and how to get it. And that's even the very first thing is like being able to, even when you get the help, even when the person is there, you have to be able to trust them first before you can even get to the thinking part, right? So I'm grateful that you've brought this up because developing trust and discernment around who to ask for help and how it's not as obvious as it sounds when I say we're stronger with support. And that's really important to note.
Yeah, so good. So, to wrap it up, I want to ask what are your top 3 tips for living an abundant life?
Well, I'm going to pull out from what we talked about earlier about this self-reflection process. Being in the state. So, we talked about this alarm and this hyperactivation, and part of the way, and the negativity bias, right? And negativity bias is fear-based, and it's important and good. And one part of the story, as we said before, abundance lies in the fullness of the whole picture. And so having that regular practice of identifying what's working and really taking into your body the sense of what it was like when that thing worked and when the outcome served you opens you to this sense of fulfillment or satisfaction or openness. So cultivating that on a regular basis is really important for a tip for cultivating a sense of abundance. The second thing I would say is gratitude practice, which is similar but not the same. Gratitude, and I want to put a caveat on what gratitude practice is. It is not making a list of things you should be grateful for and beating yourself up because you don't feel grateful because of all these wonderful things you have in your life. Gratitude practice is actually the other way around, where you look back over your day or a period of time and find something in there that you can appreciate, that you enjoyed or liked. You take into your body that experience, you kind of visualize and replay it. And then if you feel grateful at that point, then you can say, oh, I'm grateful for this. And that sense in your body of the gratitude for something you appreciated, that's an experience of abundance. And doing that on a regular basis cultivates your capacity for gratitude in the day-to-day, so that then you begin to get these grateful hits through the day. And that's an experience of abundance. And the third thing I would invite is a practice around examining your stories of not enough. Like one of the stories I told myself early in my business is I have no clients. It wasn't true. I had 5. That's not 0. Right. And so watching the stories you tell yourself about things and validating them against the truth So the truth is, I had 5, not 0. It wasn't the 20 I wanted, but it was still more than 0. And to rest in the truth of like, I have 5 clients. That's a practice of abundance as well.
I think that gratitude, I say often, gratitude is the key to abundance. And it goes back to that feeling of satisfaction you mentioned earlier. So I love it.
I'm
Well,
glad.
thank you so much. This has been absolutely amazing. There's so much gold in this episode. So if someone wants to reach out to you because they feel a business therapist would benefit them, how would they get in contact with you?
So I would say, check me out on Instagram. It's at _entrepreneurs_therapist. And the links on my link tree in my bio on Instagram lead you to all the really interesting things, including the blog post on the 6 factors of mental health vulnerability for entrepreneurs. So that if you want the notes, you can click the link to the blog post. My website is shula.ca, shula.ca, CA for Canada. And all my other stuff is there. Those would be the 2 places I'd say to check me out.
Awesome. I will have her links in the show notes so you can definitely check her out and join her newsletter. You have a newsletter, right?
Yes, I would love it if people would sign up for the newsletter. This is where I share this kind of information that we talked about today. It's all in the newsletter.
Yeah. And I really think that this is important. I think that mental and emotional health for entrepreneurs should be a priority because I feel like the better we feel, the better we're going to show up and the better work we're going to do. So I wish more people prioritized their mental and emotional health and knowing that it's not weak or you're not saying something's wrong with you to seek out help, because I think a lot of people feel that. So I really hope you check her out, join her newsletter, because I love the work that she's doing. Thank you so much, Shulamit.
Thanks,
This was
Niajae.
amazing. All right, M&Ms, until next time, be decadent. Thank you for tuning in to the Abundance Hack Show. I would love to hear from you. Leave your comments and questions, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our yummy episodes. Every time you leave a 5-star rating or review, I do my happy dance.